Introduction. What happens when a CEO decides to go undercover in his own warehouse, only to uncover a shocking truth about how his workers are being treated? This is the story of Jonathan Reed, a self-made businessman who built his logistics company from scratch. Over the past 10 years, he had expanded his operations to multiple warehouses across the state. But lately, something didn't feel right. Complaints from customers were increasing: late deliveries, damaged goods, and poor service. Employee turnover was at an all-time high, yet his management reports painted a different picture, claiming everything was under control. Unsatisfied with vague explanations, Jonathan decided to see the reality for himself. 1. Going undercover. Jonathan knew that if he walked into the warehouse as the CEO, he would never get the truth. People would put on their best behavior, and management would scramble to cover up any problems. So, he decided to go undercover as a new trainee. He shaved off his well-groomed beard, traded his usual tailored suits for an old hoodie, faded jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Thick-rimmed glasses and a baseball cap completed his disguise. He even adjusted his posture, slouching slightly to look more unassuming. He applied to work at one of his company's farthest warehouses, a location where none of the employees had met him in person. The hiring process was shockingly easy. No background check, no real training, just a quick overview of how to use a scanner. The shift supervisor, a man named Carl, handed him a scanner and grunted, "Stick with the others and don't mess up." From the moment Jonathan stepped onto the warehouse floor, he could tell something was wrong. The place was chaotic. Boxes were stacked carelessly, creating hazardous conditions. Forklifts zipped around recklessly, barely avoiding collisions. The workers looked exhausted, their movements mechanical as if they were running on autopilot. Some whispered complaints to each other, but their eyes stayed downcast, avoiding the supervisor's gaze. Jonathan's first task was sorting inventory with a small team. That's where he met Ben, a young man in his early 20s with hollow eyes and a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. Despite his obvious exhaustion, Ben worked harder than anyone else, moving twice as fast as the others. Yet, there was something about him that seemed off. He flinched every time Carl walked by, his hands trembling slightly as he handled the scanner. 2. Witnessing the harsh reality. As Jonathan worked his shift, he began to see just how bad things really were. The conditions in the warehouse were not just chaotic, they were outright dangerous. The floors were often slick with spilled liquids, making it easy to slip. Some of the forklifts had broken safety lights, yet they continued to be used, zipping past workers with only inches to spare. The air was thick with dust from improperly stored inventory, making it hard to breathe. But worst of all was the way employees were treated. During his first few hours, Jonathan noticed that breaks were barely honored. Employees were entitled to 2 short breaks and a lunch period, but Carl often forced them to skip them if orders were behind. Those who tried to take a moment to rest were berated in front of their coworkers. "You think this is a vacation?" Carl snapped at a worker who had paused to stretch his back. "Get moving before I cut your hours next week." The threat of reduced hours was a common tactic. Workers whispered about it, warning each other not to anger Carl or his assistant supervisor, Rick. If you got on their bad side, you'd find yourself with half the hours you needed to pay rent. "It's how they control us," one worker muttered to Jonathan as they stacked heavy boxes onto a pallet. "They keep us scared. Make sure we're always desperate." Jonathan saw this play out firsthand when an older worker named Lewis accidentally dropped a box, spilling its contents onto the floor. The items weren't damaged, just scattered. But Carl's reaction was immediate. "Are you serious, Lewis?" Carl stormed over, his face red with rage. "You think we got time for this?" Lewis hurried to clean up the mess, his hands shaking. "It was an accident, I don't want to hear it. That's coming out of your paycheck," Carl shouted, pointing at the scattered goods. Jonathan felt his blood boil. "Wait, that's not..." Carl whirled around, glaring. "You got something to say, rookie?" Jonathan bit his tongue, knowing he couldn't blow his cover. But inside, he seethed. Not only was Carl bullying his employees, but he was also stealing from them. Paycheck deductions for accidents like these were illegal. 3. Uncovering the exploitation. As Jonathan continued working undercover, he noticed that something far more sinister than just bad management was at play. This wasn't just a case of poor leadership or negligence. It was deliberate, systemic exploitation. Employees weren't just being overworked. They were being manipulated, their financial desperation used as a tool to keep them trapped in an abusive system. He started paying closer attention to how shifts were assigned. It became evident that hours weren't distributed based on performance or availability. Instead, they were given out selectively as a means of control. If a worker fell out of favor with Carl or Rick, their hours were slashed, making it nearly impossible to earn enough to pay rent or feed their families. Employees lived in constant fear of sudden shift reductions, knowing that even the smallest mistake could lead to financial ruin. But that wasn't the worst of it. Jonathan soon learned about a secret payday loan scheme operating within the warehouse. Workers who were struggling to make ends meet were quietly approached by Rick and offered an advance on their paychecks. The catch? These advances came with sky-high interest rates. If a worker borrowed $100, they would owe $150 by the end of the month. If they failed to pay on time, their hours would be cut even further, making repayment nearly impossible. Many workers were trapped in a vicious cycle of debt, forced to take out more loans just to keep up. Jonathan was furious. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. His employees were being turned into modern-day indentured servants, working endless hours just to stay afloat while their supervisors profited off their desperation. He spoke to Ben about it during a quiet moment in the loading dock. "How long has this been going on?" Jonathan asked. Ben let out a humorless chuckle. "Years. Carl and Rick control everything. You piss them off, you don't get shifts. You don't get shifts, you don't get paid. Then they offer you a loan to help you out, but it's a trap. You miss a payment, they dock your hours more. It never ends." Jonathan clenched his jaw. Why hasn't anyone reported this? Ben shook his head. To who? HR? They don't care. They send everything back to Carl. And if he finds out you complained, say goodbye to your job. You're blacklisted from every warehouse in the area. Jonathan knew he had to act fast. He needed concrete proof, evidence strong enough to take down Carl and Rick without putting the workers in danger. Over the next few days, he quietly gathered information. He documented the illegal paycheck deductions, recorded conversations about the payday loans, and collected testimonies from employees who had been victimized by the scheme. One evening, after most of the employees had left, Jonathan stayed behind in the break room, pretending to check his schedule. He overheard a hushed conversation between Carl and Rick. "Payroll cut again this week?" Rick asked. Carl smirked. "Yeah. Told corporate we had too much overtime, so they knocked it down. Suckers will just have to work faster." Rick chuckled. "You dock Lewis for that box he dropped?" "Damn right. Idiot needs to learn." Jonathan gritted his teeth, but forced himself to remain calm. He had everything he needed. It was time to put an end to this once and for all. 4. Taking action. Jonathan knew that removing Carl and Rick was only the first step. The real challenge was ensuring that the toxic environment they had cultivated didn't persist under new leadership. He needed to act swiftly and implement changes that would permanently improve conditions in the warehouse. The first step was transparency. Jonathan called an emergency all-hands meeting, where he revealed his true identity to the employees. The reaction was a mixture of shock, suspicion, and cautious hope. Many of them had been conditioned to expect false promises from management. "I know you have every reason not to trust me," Jonathan admitted, "but I'm not here to sweep this under the rug. I've seen firsthand what you go through every day, and it's unacceptable. Starting today, things are going to change." To ensure accountability, he immediately hired an external auditing team to review payroll records and reimburse employees for every cent that had been unfairly deducted from their wages. Within a week, employees received back pay for their lost earnings. This was the first tangible sign that Jonathan was serious about fixing things. Next, he implemented a strict policy against retaliation. Employees who reported mistreatment would be protected, and anyone found guilty of harassment or intimidation, whether a manager or coworker, would face immediate termination. To further support this initiative, Jonathan introduced an anonymous reporting system where employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. This system was managed by a third-party compliance team, ensuring that complaints were investigated impartially and that employees felt safe coming forward with workplace issues. Jonathan also knew that employee well-being was just as important as financial fairness. He introduced structured break schedules and ergonomic improvements in workstations to reduce physical strain. Additionally, he partnered with a local credit union to provide fair financial assistance to workers, effectively eliminating the need for the predatory payday loans that had previously trapped them in debt. Beyond policy changes, Jonathan made an effort to rebuild morale. He spent time on the warehouse floor, not as an observer but as a participant. He worked alongside employees, listened to their concerns, and ensured that new managers were chosen based on their ability to lead with fairness and empathy. 5. Restructuring the warehouse. Once the immediate damage was addressed, Jonathan turned his attention to long-term solutions. He started by hiring new leadership, people who had worked their way up in logistics and understood the struggles of warehouse employees firsthand. These new managers were given strict guidelines on ethical leadership, and their performance would be measured not just by efficiency, but by employee satisfaction and retention rates. Jonathan also restructured scheduling policies to ensure fairness. Employees would now receive stable hours with clear expectations. Overtime would be optional and compensated fairly, rather than being used as a manipulative tool. Additionally, he introduced an employee advisory board, giving workers a direct line of communication to upper management. To improve overall workplace culture, Jonathan invested in training programs to provide employees with opportunities for advancement. Workers who had once felt trapped in dead-end jobs were now given the chance to gain certifications, move into higher-paying roles, and even transition into office positions within the company. Perhaps the most impactful change came in the form of an annual CEO warehouse shift program. Going forward, every executive in the company, including Jonathan himself, would be required to spend one full week each year working in a warehouse or on a delivery route. This ensured that no future leadership would become disconnected from the realities of the job. These changes did not happen overnight, and not everyone believed in them at first. But as time passed, employees began to see that Jonathan was true to his word. Productivity increased, not out of fear, but because employees finally felt valued. Turnover rates dropped, and customer satisfaction improved as a result of a more motivated workforce. What had once been a place of fear and exploitation was now a workplace where employees felt respected, heard, and fairly compensated. Lessons learned. This story teaches us several powerful lessons. 1. Leadership accountability matters. When leaders disconnect from their workforce, corruption and exploitation can take root. True leadership involves direct engagement with employees and a commitment to fairness. 2. Workplace ethics should be a priority. A company's success isn't just about profits. It's about how well it treats its workers. Ethical workplaces lead to better productivity, lower turnover, and a positive reputation. 3. Courage to speak up. Many employees suffer in silence due to fear of retaliation. Having anonymous reporting systems and protective measures encourages workers to stand up against unfair treatment. 4. The power of taking action. Change doesn't happen by itself. One person's decision to take action, whether a CEO, an employee, or a whistleblower, can create ripple effects that transform entire workplaces. 5. A business is only as strong as its workers. Employees are the backbone of any company. When they are treated with respect, paid fairly, and given a safe environment, they perform better and are more dedicated to their jobs. 6. Ethical business practices benefit everyone. Companies that prioritize fairness and employee well-being don't just help their workers. They also gain higher efficiency, better customer satisfaction, and long-term success. These lessons remind us that every business has the responsibility to create a fair and just working environment where employees are valued and protected. This story teaches us the importance of leadership accountability and workplace ethics. It highlights how power, if left unchecked, can lead to abuse, and how a single leader's decision to take action can transform an entire system for the better. Fairness, transparency, and dignity should be the foundation of every workplace. Meaningful message. The story of Jonathan Reed is a reminder that true leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about understanding and valuing the people who keep the business running. When employees are treated with respect, paid fairly, and given a safe working environment, they are not only more productive but also more engaged and committed to their work. Personal perspective. In a world where corporations often prioritize profits over people, Jonathan's story serves as an inspiring example of what happens when a leader chooses ethics over exploitation. Businesses should not thrive at the expense of their workers. Instead, they should create environments where employees are valued, heard, and empowered. If you found this story inspiring and want to hear more impactful narratives, subscribe to Story Precious. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, justice, and transformation. Don't forget to like, comment, and turn on notifications to never miss an update.